feel right from creating chaos. I'm just going to go over a bit of a demonstration really of something that we feel should be an integral part of every warm-up. Our philosophy with warm-ups is mobilise, activate, accelerate. Mobilise being loosen off the joints, predominantly with forms of dynamic stretching. Activate being activating the core muscles, and I'll discuss core a little bit more in detail in a few seconds. And then accelerate. Accelerate being really get the heart rate up and elevated to an appropriate level of the session that you're going to be working through. So within this demonstration, I'm not really going to focus on mobilise or the accelerate part. As a trainer yourself, you're better placed to be able to deliberate those appropriately for the session that you've got planned. All I'm looking at is the activate element. In exercise we speak a lot about core, and there's a few different components of core. Much more in depth we cover this on the primal course. One element is the deeper muscles that don't really provide global movement for the body, however they stabilise certain elements of the joints and the internal parts of the body to allow bigger movements to take place. And core also includes huge global drivers, and sometimes we can forget these. We did break these down again, as I said, further on the course, but we're looking specifically at 4 miofascial slings, and these sit differently across and through the hip complex. One is very much to the front, the anterior oblique sling. You've got the posterior oblique sling on the back, the lateral sling which sits laterally across the hips, and the deep longitudinal sling which sits pretty much from the ankle all the way up through the lower leg into the hips and into the back. So I'm going to go through 4 different movements that I think should form a really core part of any warm-up to really fire up the muscles. Okay, so again, just to reiterate, I'm assuming that you've already done your mobility workout and you do some form of pulse raiser, which I've referred to as accelerate after these 4 movements. Okay, so for each of these movements, I'm going to suggest that you do them for roughly 30 to 40 seconds each. Okay, so the first one we're looking at is really firing up the anterior oblique sling. Okay, so this movement here, just stepping forwards, predominant flexion from the hip and not knee, so you're not going through a lunge, and just reaching down with the opposite arm. Okay, the second movement, very similar. You're going to take a step forward, so you're extending through the hip, and then pulling the elbow back on the side that you're stepping forward. Okay, so a little bit of coordination, but try to alternate. Allow that opposite arm to come forward and counter-rotate. And whilst you're doing it, consciously try and activate the glutes. Okay, so that is the posterior oblique sling that we're trying to work up there. Okay, the next one, we're going to do this one independently on each side, so 20 to 25 seconds on each side. Okay. Once you've done one side, again, like all the previous movements, most of the flexion from the hip, so try not to drop into a lunge. It's really the hip complex that we're trying to work. 4th and final movement, just lateral movement, and you're just stepping through it, so no jumping at this stage. As you can note, I'm exaggerating breathing really just to give the deeper muscles a little bit more encouragement to work through those movements. Okay, so that 4th and final one was looking at the lateral sling. So in order, just to remind you, first one, anterior oblique, just reaching down to that forward step. Second one, posterior oblique, just pulling away from the forward step with the elbow. Third one, which is the deep longitudinal sling, just reaching down onto the 4th step and then taking a small step back with an overhead reach. And the 4th and final one, lateral sling, just taking a step sideways and rotating through the movement. Hopefully you found it useful. Enjoy.